Story 1. Israel Keyes was born on January 7, 1978, in Richmond, Utah. He was the second of 10 children. His parents were Heidi and Jeff Keyes. The family belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they lived in Torrance, California, before Israel was old enough to go to school. When Israel was young, his parents taught him and his siblings at home. They did not attend regular public schools. In 1983, when Israel was 5 years old, the family moved to a remote piece of land north of Colville, Washington. The land was far from town, and the family lived in a small cabin with only one room. The cabin had no electricity and no running water. Because the cabin was small, some of the children slept in a tent outside. The children were expected to hunt for their own food, cut firewood, and work on local farms to help the family earn money. In Colville, the family went to a church called the Arkansas. This church taught white supremacist beliefs and followed a lifestyle similar to the Amish, avoiding modern conveniences. While attending this church, the Keyes family became friends with another family nearby. That family had a son named Chavi Kehoe, who later was convicted of killing 3 people in 1996. Later, the Keyes family left the Ark and joined another church called the Christian Israel Covenant Church. This church also taught white supremacist ideas. Israel later said the church was like a militia group. As a boy, Israel hunted often. He told people at the church that he had skinned a live deer. Other children began to stay away from him. One former classmate later said that being around Israel made her skin crawl. By the time Israel was 14 years old, he was already 6 feet 2 inches tall. He admitted that he shot at his neighbors' houses with a BB gun. He also started fires in the woods. Around this time, he broke into houses with another young person. During one of those outings, Israel shot an animal, and the other young person stopped spending time with him after that. Israel later told investigators that by age 14, he believed some of his thoughts were normal, even though other people did not agree. He said he began to keep to himself after others found out about his behavior. When Israel was a teenager, his parents found a stash of guns he had stolen from a neighbor. They made him return the guns and apologize. In 1994, when he was 16, he was arrested for shoplifting. He was given community service as punishment. Around that same time, he also sold stolen guns to people in the area. While the family lived in Colville, they gave shelter to family friends. One of those friends later said that Israel tied a cat to a tree with a parachute cord and shot it with a .22 revolver. Some of the friend's children and one of Israel's sisters saw this happen. Israel later said he found the incident amusing. He also said that after this, he began to keep his bad behavior more secret because he did not want others to see it. His mother later said she noticed troubling behavior in him during these years. Even with these problems, Israel learned to work with wood. He became a skilled carpenter. At age 16, he built his first wooden cabin by himself. From 1995 to 1997, he worked for a contractor in Colville. Around that time, he started keeping a journal. In it, he wrote Bible verses and also listed sins he felt ashamed of, such as having lustful thoughts about his girlfriend. The family eventually moved to Smyrna, Maine. There, they collected sap from maple trees to make syrup. They lived near an Amish community. Their mother did not allow the children to watch movies with friends or learn to play musical instruments. She believed those things were against God's will. During this time in Maine, Israel stopped believing in God. He told his parents he was an atheist. He had tried to please them before, but after an argument, they evicted him for blasphemy. They told his younger siblings, who had looked up to him, to never have contact with him again. After losing his family, Israel became interested in Satanism. He began to think about committing a murder as part of a ritual. In the summer of either 1997 or 1998, Israel drove to Maupin, Oregon. There he saw a teenage girl tubing down the Deschutes River with friends. He believed the girl was between 14 and 18 years old. He hid in the trees and watched her. Then he came out, threatened her with a knife, and sexually assaulted her very violently. His original plan had been to kill her as a satanic ritual, but she pleaded with him and promised not to tell anyone. He let her go. Later, when speaking to investigators, he said he had been too timid and not violent enough, and he decided he would not let that happen again. On April 22, 1998, Israel joined the United States Army. He signed up in Albany, New York, and reported for basic training that July. He became a specialist and was assigned to a unit at Fort Lewis in Washington. He also spent time at Fort Hood in Texas and served overseas in the Sinai Peninsula. While in the Army, he completed a month-long course for Ranger training, but did not attend the full Ranger school. Fellow soldiers remembered him as quiet and someone who kept to himself. On weekends, he drank heavily, sometimes finishing entire bottles of bourbon. In February 2001, he was arrested in Thurston County, Washington, for driving under the influence. He reached a plea agreement and paid a fine. He was honorably discharged from the Army on July 8, 2001. After that, he moved to Knee Bay, Washington, which was on the Makah Reservation on the Olympic Peninsula. He had met a Native American woman named Tammy Hawkins online in late 2000, and they became a couple. Later they had a daughter together. The relationship ended around 2004. During the years after his discharge, Israel worked as a handyman, a contractor, and a construction worker. In 2007, he started his own construction business in Alaska called Keys Construction. By that time, he was also dating a nurse named Kimberly Anderson. After leaving the Army in 2001, Keys began committing crimes that he kept hidden. He later admitted to burglarizing a home in Texas and setting it on fire. He also robbed banks. In April 2009, he robbed a community bank branch in Tupper Lake, New York. He used cash for almost everything so that his purchases could not be traced. When he traveled to commit crimes, he turned off his mobile phone so that investigators could not track his location. Keys developed a method of hiding supplies in advance. He would travel to an area, bury a plastic container with weapons, duct tape, gloves, and other tools, and then return months or years later to use those items. This way, he did not have to carry incriminating objects through airports or rental cars. He buried at least 2 such caches that investigators later found, one near Eagle River, Alaska, and one near Blake Falls Reservoir in New York. He told investigators there may have been other caches in Wyoming and Washington. On April 8, 2009, a 48-year-old woman named Deborah J. Feldman disappeared from her apartment in Hackensack, New Jersey. The next day, Keys later confessed he abducted a woman from a state on the East Coast. He said he transported her across state lines and then buried her in New York near Tupper Lake. When investigators showed him a photograph of Deborah Feldman, he paused and said he did not want to talk about her yet. The FBI later said they believed Feldman was one of his victims. Keys planned his murders carefully. He chose victims he did not know so that police would have no connection between him and them. He often flew to a city, rented a car, and drove hundreds of miles to a different state before acting. After committing the crime, he would drive back, return the rental car, and fly home to Alaska. This made it difficult for law enforcement to connect him to crimes in other parts of the country. In 2009, Keys traveled to Vermont. 2 years before the crime, he had buried a murder kit near the home of William and Lorraine Currier in Essex, Vermont. On the night of June 8, 2011, he broke into their house. He tied the couple up and forced them into their own car. He drove them to an abandoned farmhouse. There, he shot William Currier. He then sexually assaulted and strangled Lorraine Currier. He disposed of their bodies in a place he never fully revealed, and their remains have never been found. After the murders, he moved the remaining items from his Vermont cache to a new hiding place in Parishville, New York, where they stayed until after his arrest. Keys's final confirmed victim was 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. She worked at a coffee booth called Common Grounds in Anchorage, Alaska. On the night of February 1st, 2012, Keys approached the booth near closing time. He had a gun and a rope. He forced Samantha into her car and drove her to a shed behind his home. He kept her there, raping and sodomizing her, before strangling her with the rope. After killing her, Keys left her body in the shed. He had already booked a 2-week cruise in the Gulf of Mexico with his family. He went on the cruise as planned, leaving Samantha's body in the shed. When he returned to Anchorage on February 18th, he went back to the shed. He sexually assaulted her body. Then he applied makeup to her face and sewed her eyes open with fishing line. He wanted to make her appear alive. He photographed her body next to a copy of the Anchorage Daily News that was 4 days old. He used that photograph to make it look like she was still alive on that date. Keys then sent a ransom demand. He demanded $30,000 be deposited into Samantha's bank account. Some of the money was deposited. After receiving the ransom, Keys dismembered Samantha's body. He disposed of the remains in Matanuska Lake, north of Anchorage. Later, FBI divers recovered her remains from the lake. Keys used Samantha's debit card to withdraw money as he traveled through the southwestern United States. He used ATMs in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Police tracked the withdrawals. They obtained surveillance images of a man using the card at ATMs. They also had a description of the car he was driving. This gave them a way to find him. Police in Anchorage tracked the withdrawals from Samantha Koenig's bank account. The person using the card took money from ATMs in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Law enforcement circulated a bulletin describing the suspect's car, a rental vehicle that had been seen at the ATMs. Officers in Texas began watching hotel parking lots for rental cars with out-of-state plates that matched the description. On the morning of March 13, 2012, a Texas Highway Patrol corporal and a Texas Ranger were on patrol in Lufkin, Texas. They saw a car that matched the bulletin. The driver went slightly over the speed limit, so they pulled him over. The driver was Israel Keys. When they searched his car, they found cash stained with bright ink. That ink came from a dye pack used in bank robberies. They also found Samantha Koenig's ATM card and her cell phone. Keys was arrested. He was first held in Texas, then extradited to Alaska to face charges. At first, he claimed someone had thrown Samantha's card and phone into his open car window. He was charged with fraud related to using the bank account. Later, after investigators presented more evidence, he confessed to kidnapping and murdering Samantha Koenig. While Keys was in jail in Anchorage, federal and state investigators interviewed him for more than 40 hours over several months. He talked about his methods and admitted to the Courier murders in Vermont and to abducting and burying a woman near Tupper Lake, New York. He hinted at other murders, but often refused to give full details unless he was promised a certain outcome for his case. He told investigators he wanted to be executed within a year to avoid a long trial and the media attention that would bring shame to his daughter. During this time, investigators from the FBI and other agencies worked to corroborate what Keys told them. They searched the shed behind his home in Anchorage. They recovered the murder kit he had hidden in Parrishville, New York. They used his travel records, rental car logs, and the times he turned off his phone to try to match him to unsolved missing persons cases across the country. On May 23, 2012, while he was being brought to a routine court hearing, Keys tried to escape. He had used wood shavings from a pencil to pick the locks on his handcuffs. U.S. Marshals used a taser to stop him before he could get away. Keys remained in the Anchorage Correctional Complex while awaiting trial. His trial was scheduled to begin in March 2013. Even though he was under close supervision, he managed to hide a razor blade in his cell. It is not known exactly how he got the blade, because he was only allowed to use an electric razor under supervision. On the night of December 1st, 2012, Keyes used the razor blade to cut his left wrist. He then wrapped a rolled-up bedsheet around his neck and strangled himself. Guards found him dead in his cell. Beneath his body, they found a suicide note that was described as an ode to murder. It did not give clear information about any other victims. After his death, the FBI continued to investigate the full scope of his crimes. In 2013, the FBI released a public timeline of Keyes' known travel and asked for the public's help in identifying other victims. In 2020, the FBI released photographs of drawings that had been found under Keyes' bed after his suicide. He had drawn 11 skulls and a pentagram using his own blood. One of the drawings had the words, "We are one," written at the bottom. Investigators interpreted the 11 skulls as representing the total number of people they believed he had killed, though only 3 of those victims were ever confirmed. The remains of Samantha Koenig were recovered from Matanuska Lake by the FBI's underwater search team. The bodies of William and Lorraine Currier were never found. Deborah Feldman was never found, but the FBI stated they believed she was one of Keyes' victims. Because Keyes died before trial, there was no conviction or sentence. The case against him was closed following his suicide. The victims' families were left without a full accounting of all the crimes he may have committed, and investigators were unable to definitively link him to many of the cases they had suspected. The story of Israel Keyes ends in a jail cell in Anchorage, Alaska, on December 1st, 2012, with 11 skulls drawn in blood and a final question of how many lives he truly took that will never be fully answered. Story 2. Rex Andrew Hoyerman was born on September 13, 1963. He grew up in Massapequa Park, a town on the south shore of Long Island, New York. His family lived in a modest house on a quiet street. His father worked in a trade, and his mother stayed home to raise Rex and his siblings. Neighbors later said the family kept to themselves and did not cause trouble. As a child, Rex was described as tall and thin. He went to the local public schools. In high school, he was not known for being popular or athletic. Instead, he spent much of his time alone. Some classmates remembered him as quiet and a little strange, but no one thought he was dangerous. He liked to draw and showed an interest in buildings and structures. After high school, he attended the New York City College of Technology, where he studied architecture. He did not finish a degree, but he learned enough to start working in the field. In 1987, Rex began working in Manhattan. He found a job at an architecture firm and stayed in that line of work for his whole career. He learned how to design buildings and eventually started his own small firm. He worked out of an office in Midtown Manhattan. His clients were usually property owners who needed renovations or small commercial projects. To people at work, he seemed like a hard worker who kept to himself. He did not make close friends at the office. In September 1990, Rex married a woman from New Jersey. The wedding took place in New Brunswick. The marriage did not last long. Less than 1 year later, in 1991, they divorced. There were no children from that marriage. After the divorce, Rex continued living on Long Island. He stayed in the Massapequa Park area, moving to a house on First Avenue. He lived alone for several years. In April 1996, Rex married again. His second wife was a woman who worked in the city. They bought a house together on First Avenue in Massapequa Park, the same street where Rex had grown up. The house was an old ranch style with a small yard. Rex and his wife had 2 children, a daughter and a son. By then, Rex was in his mid-30s. He went to work in Manhattan each day, taking the Long Island Railroad or driving his truck. On weekends, he worked on the house and spent time with his family. To his neighbors, Rex was a tall, big man who kept to himself. He did not wave or stop to talk much. Some neighbors said he would work on his truck or do repairs on his house, but he did not join community events. He did not have close friends in the neighborhood. His wife and children were involved in local activities, but Rex usually stayed in the background. There were no complaints about him, and no police calls to his house. He had no criminal record. Rex kept a routine. He woke early, drove to the train station or drove into the city, worked long hours, and came home in the evening. People who worked with him said he was skilled at his job, but could be short-tempered when things did not go his way. Still, he was never fired or formally disciplined. He spent many hours at his computer, both for work and for personal use. He had a habit of searching the internet for a wide range of topics. No one in his family knew the full extent of what he looked at online. In his free time, Rex owned several vehicles. One of them was a dark green Chevrolet Avalanche, a pickup truck with a distinct look. He kept it clean and used it for errands and driving to job sites. He also collected firearms and had a license to own them. He stored them in his home. His wife and children did not share his interest in guns. Over the years, Rex stayed in the same house. He continued his architecture work, though his firm was small and did not grow much. Financially, the family had some struggles, but they managed. Rex's behavior did not raise suspicion among the people around him. He appeared to be a normal suburban husband and father. Nothing in his early life or his years as a young adult would have made anyone think he would one day be accused of killing multiple people. Rex Heuermann went about his daily life in Massapequa Park while, over the course of nearly 2 decades, he allegedly killed at least 7 women. The crimes followed a pattern, but the pattern changed over time. In the early years, he left some victims in wooded areas far from his home. Later, he placed bodies along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. He used the same basic method. He found women who were working as escorts, contacted them, arranged to meet, and then killed them. The first victim linked to Heuermann was Sandra Costilla. She was 28 years old and came from Trinidad and Tobago. She lived in New York City in 1993. On November 19th or 20 of that year, she disappeared. Hunters found her body in a wooded area in North Sea, Long Island, about 60 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach. She had been killed with blunt force and sharp objects. Investigators collected hairs from her body, but the case went cold. At that time, Heuermann was 30 years old and newly married to his second wife. He lived in Massapequa Park and commuted to Manhattan. No one connected him to Sandra Costilla for decades. For several years after 1993, no other victims were publicly linked to Heuermann. Then in 2000, Valerie Mack disappeared. She was 24 years old, small in stature, and worked as an escort. She sometimes used the name Melissa Taylor. She had grown up in foster care and had a young son. In the spring or summer of 2000, she was last seen by family in New Jersey. On November 19, 2000, a man found her partial remains in Manorville, New York. Her torso was wrapped in garbage bags and dumped in the woods near a power line access road. Her head, hands, and right foot were not found at that time. The way her body was left showed that someone had taken time to cut her into pieces. The killer then placed the parts away from where most people would go. 3 years later, in July 2003, Heuermann allegedly killed again. Jessica Taylor was 20 years old. She worked as an escort in Manhattan and Washington, D.C. She was last seen around July 21st near the Port Authority bus terminal. 5 days later, on July 26th, her torso was found in Manorville, about 45 miles east of Gilgo Beach. She had been dismembered, and a tattoo on her body had been cut off with a sharp tool. Her skull, hands, and forearm were not found at that time. The location where her torso was dumped was close to where Valerie Mack's remains had been found 3 years earlier. Both women were escorts, both were dismembered, and both were left in the same area of Manorville. Investigators later noted the similarity. but did not yet know who the killer was. Hoyerman's pattern shifted after these early killings. Starting in 2007, he began leaving victims near the south shore of Long Island, close to Gilgo Beach. The first of these was Maureen Brainerd Barnes. She was 25 years old and a mother of 2 children. She lived in Norwich, Connecticut, and worked as a telemarketer, but when she could not pay her mortgage, she returned to escort work, which she had done before. She advertised on Craigslist. On July 9, 2007, she told a friend she was going to meet a client outside a Super 8 motel in Manhattan. She was never seen again. After she disappeared, her friend Sarah Carnes received a phone call from a man using a blocked number. The man said he had just seen Maureen and that she was staying at a whorehouse in Queens. He refused to give his name or address. He said he would call back with details, but never did. The man had no clear accent. In 2009, Hoyerman allegedly killed Melissa Barthelemy. She was 24 years old and lived in the Bronx. She worked as an escort and used the name Chloe. On July 12th, she met with a client, deposited $900 into her bank account, and tried to call an old boyfriend. She did not reach him. That was the last anyone heard from her. About 1 week after she vanished, her 15-year-old sister Amanda began receiving phone calls from a man using Melissa's cell phone. The calls came several times over 5 weeks. The man said vulgar things. He asked Amanda if she was a whore like her sister. Eventually, he told Amanda that Melissa was dead and that he would watch her rot. The calls were traced to areas in Manhattan, including Madison Square Garden, and to Massapequa, the town where Hoyerman lived. At the time, police could not identify the caller. The next victim was Megan Waterman. She was 22 years old from Maine. She was a victim of sex trafficking and worked as an escort, advertising on Craigslist. On June 6, 2010, she was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, New York, about 15 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach. She told her boyfriend she was going out and would call later. She did not call. Her family reported her missing 2 days later because she had not checked in about her 3-year-old daughter. Megan Waterman's body was later found wrapped in burlap. Amber Lynn Costello was the last of the 4 women found near Gilgo Beach in 2010. She was 27 years old and lived in West Babylon, a town close to Gilgo Beach. She had struggled with drug addiction. On September 2, 2010, a stranger called her several times and offered $1,500 or $2,500 for her services. She went to meet him and never returned. Her roommates did not report her missing right away because they believed she had gone to a drug rehabilitation center. One of her roommates later gave police a description of the client and the vehicle he was driving. The roommate said the client was a large, tall man with a deep voice. The man drove a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, a pickup truck with a distinctive look. The truck was dark green. At the time of these disappearances, police did not yet know the women were connected. In May 2010, another woman named Shannon Gilbert had vanished after making a panicked 911 call in Oak Beach, a community near Gilgo Beach. The police began searching for her. In December 2010, a police officer with a cadaver dog was searching along Ocean Parkway, a road that runs near the beach. On December 11th, the dog alerted near some brush. The officer found human remains wrapped in burlap. Those remains were identified as Melissa Barthelemy. As police searched the area, they found 3 more sets of remains within a quarter of a mile. Those were Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. All 4 were wrapped in burlap. All 4 were petite women, between 4 feet 10 inches and 5 feet tall. All 4 had been working as escorts and had advertised on Craigslist. Investigators collected evidence from the scene. On or near the bodies, they found hairs. Some of the hairs did not belong to the victims. They also found a belt made of black leather with the letters HM or WH stamped into it. Investigators believed the belt had been handled by the killer. They kept this evidence for future analysis. The police continued searching the area in early 2011. In March and April, they found more remains. Some were connected to earlier cases. On March 29th, they found additional remains of Jessica Taylor, the victim from 2003. Her skull, hands, and forearm were discovered along Ocean Parkway, not far from where the 4 women had been found. On April 4th, they found remains of Valerie Mack, the victim from 2000. Her head, right foot, and hands were discovered in the same general area. Both women had been dismembered, and their body parts had been left in 2 different places, Manorville for the torsos and Gilgo Beach for the remaining parts. The way the bodies were handled showed the killer knew the area and was comfortable traveling long distances to dispose of remains. In these same searches, police also found the remains of a young Asian person, later called Asian Doe, and the remains of a toddler and her mother, who were later identified as Tatiana Dykes and Tanya Jackson. These last 2 were not believed to be connected to Hoyerman in later charges. By April 2011, police had recovered the remains of at least 10 people in the area. They did not yet have a suspect. The investigation was slowed by conflicts between police departments and by the fact that the killer had taken steps to hide his identity. He used a burner phone or a blocked number to contact victims. He chose victims who were vulnerable and whose disappearances were not immediately reported by family. He drove a vehicle that was common enough not to stand out. He disposed of bodies in remote areas that were not searched regularly. Throughout the years when these killings took place, Hoyerman continued his normal life. He went to work in Manhattan. He came home to his wife and children. He worked on his house and drove his Chevrolet Avalanche. No one reported anything suspicious about him. The phone calls made from Melissa Barthelomy's phone were traced to Massapequa, but that was a large area, and police did not have enough evidence to identify a specific person. The roommate's description of the client who picked up Amber Costello, a tall, large man with a deep voice driving a dark green Chevrolet Avalanche, was noted but did not immediately lead to Hoyerman because police did not know whose truck that was. Hoyerman, meanwhile, continued to search the internet. He looked up information about the victims. He searched for news about the investigation. He also searched for violent and illegal materials, including images of the victims and their relatives. He used email accounts and computers that were not shared with his family. He kept these activities hidden. The crimes spanned from 1993 to 2010. In each case, Hoyerman allegedly used his knowledge of the area, his access to a vehicle, and his ability to contact escorts without being easily traced. He left evidence, hairs, a belt, phone records, but for many years, that evidence was not connected to him. He remained in his house on First Avenue, living as a husband and father, while the bodies of the women he killed lay in the brush along Ocean Parkway and in the woods of Manorville. After the remains were found in late 2010 and early 2011, the Suffolk County Police Department began a large investigation. For years, the case moved slowly. Different police agencies did not always share information. The Suffolk County Police Commissioner at the time, James Burke, did not allow the FBI to join the investigation. In 2015, Burke was indicted for civil rights violations and conspiracy. He later resigned and was sentenced to federal prison. After Burke left, the new police commissioner asked the FBI to officially join the investigation in December 2015. This brought more resources and new methods to the case. One of the new methods was genetic genealogy. In 2019, investigators began using this technique to identify unknown remains. They took DNA from the unidentified victims and compared it to public genealogy databases. This allowed them to find distant relatives and then build family trees. By 2020, they had identified Valerie Mack, whose remains had been found in 2000 and 2011. In 2022, they identified Karen Vergata, whose remains had been found in 1996 and 2011. These identifications gave investigators more information about the victims, but they still did not have a suspect. While the work on victims continued, a different team of investigators focused on the evidence left by the killer. One key piece was the description from Amber Costello's roommate. The roommate said a tall, heavy man with a deep voice had picked up Amber in a dark green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. In 2022, investigators searched vehicle registration records for that type of truck. They found that Rex Hoyerman owned a dark green 2002 Chevrolet Avalanche. He lived in Massapequa Park, which was close to the areas where the victims had been taken and where some of the harassing phone calls had been traced. Investigators then looked at cell phone records. They found that Hoyerman's cell phone had been used in areas and at times that matched the disappearances of several victims. The next step was DNA. During the original crime scene searches, investigators had recovered hairs from the burlap wrappings and from the bodies of the victims. Some of those hairs did not match the victims. In 2022 and 2023, investigators followed Hoyerman to gather his DNA without his knowledge. They watched him in Manhattan and collected items he discarded, including a pizza crust. They also took garbage from the trash cans outside his house. From that trash, they recovered bottles and other items that contained DNA from Hoyerman and from his wife. Laboratory testing showed that a hair found on the burlap used to wrap one of the victims matched the DNA from the pizza crust, which came from Hoyerman. Mitochondrial DNA testing indicated that Hoyerman could not be excluded as the source. In addition, hairs found on or near 3 of the victims were compared to the bottles from the trash. Those hairs were found to match the DNA profile of Hoyerman's wife. Investigators looked at travel records and saw that Hoyerman's wife and children were out of state each time the killings happened. That explained why her hair was at the crime scenes. It was likely transferred from Hoyerman's clothing, vehicle, or home, not because she was present. With this evidence, investigators presented their findings to a grand jury. On July 13, 2023, Rex Hoyerman was arrested in Midtown Manhattan as he left his architecture office. He was 59 years old. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. He was also named as the prime suspect in the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. When police searched his home in Massapequa Park, they found hundreds of firearms, which he was legally permitted to own, along with computers and other electronics. They also found a Chevrolet Avalanche parked at the house. After his arrest, investigators continued to build their case. They linked Hoyerman to Maureen Brainerd Barnes through additional evidence, including DNA and phone records. In January 2024, he was indicted for her murder. The investigation also went back to older cases. Using the same DNA methods, they matched a hair found on Sandra Costilla's body to Hoyerman. Costilla had been killed in 1993, nearly 30 years before his arrest. On June 6, 2024, Hoyerman was charged with her murder and also with the murder of Jessica Taylor, the victim from 2003. Investigators had found that an email account tied to Hoyerman had been used to search for information about Jessica Taylor's disappearance. Then, in December 2024, he was indicted for the murder of Valerie Mack, the victim from 2000. In total, Hoyerman was charged with 7 murders. Throughout the court proceedings, Hoyerman pleaded not guilty to all counts. His lawyers stated that he would fight the charges. The judge ordered him held without bail because of the seriousness of the crimes and the strength of the evidence. As of the end of 2024, he remained in custody at the Suffolk County Jail, awaiting trial. For the families of the victims, the arrest brought a long-awaited step toward justice. Many had spent years wondering what happened to their daughters, sisters, and mothers. The identifications of previously unknown victims gave closure to families who had not known where their loved ones had gone. The investigation also revealed that not all the remains found along Ocean Parkway were connected to Hoyerman. In December 2025, a different man, Andrew Dykes, was charged with the murders of Tanya Jackson and her daughter Tatiana Dykes, whose remains had been found in 1997 and 2011. Police concluded those deaths were separate from the Gilgo Beach serial killings. The case against Rex Hoyerman was built piece by piece over more than a decade, using witness descriptions, vehicle records, cell phone data, and DNA technology that did not exist when the first victims died. Each piece of evidence led to the next, until investigators had enough to arrest a man who had lived quietly on Long Island while carrying out a series of murders that spanned nearly 20 years. The story of the Gilgo Beach murders ended for now, with Rex Hoyerman locked in a jail cell, waiting for a jury to decide whether he would be convicted of the 7 killings he was charged with committing. Story 3. Alexander Kiselev was born in 1978 in the city of Perm, in a region called Perm Oblast. His parents both worked for the FSIN, which is the government agency that runs prisons in Russia. He was their only child. There was no trouble or unusual behavior in the family when he was young. When Alexander became a teenager, things started to change. He began to show signs of a mental illness. No one gave it a name at the time, but his behavior shifted. He stopped spending time with other young people his age. He pulled away from his peers and kept to himself. At home, this led to arguments with his father. Alexander finished the 9th grade of school. After that, he did not continue his education. He also did not look for a job. Instead, he lived off his mother. She supported him. In the late 1990s, he moved into an old apartment building on the edge of the city. The address was 64 Penzinskaya Street. He lived there alone. In the early 2000s, Alexander developed a habit of making up false stories about himself. He would tell people things that were not true. He often introduced himself using the nickname Kuden. This was the name of a local gangster who had been known in the city during the 1990s. By using that name, Alexander tried to make others believe he had connections to the criminal world. He pretended to be someone with power and influence. In reality, he had no such connections. Before this time in his life, he had not been known for any criminal activity. He spent his days in the apartment. He did not have a regular job. He kept to himself most of the time, except when he went out to meet people or walk around the city. His mother continued to provide for him. He had few friends. The false stories he told about himself became a regular part of how he tried to appear to others. That was his life in the early 2000s. He lived in the old apartment on Penzinskaya Street. He had no real job. He pretended to be a person with criminal ties, even though he had none. And he spent his time alone, with no clear plan for his future. In October 2003, Kiselev met 2 young women at the Perm 2 railway station. Their names were Lilia Taratina, who was 18 years old, and Olesya Danutsa, who was 20 years old. Both were university students. They had been away for the summer at their parents' homes in a town called Kogalym, and they were returning to Perm to continue their studies. Kiselev approached them at the station and offered to carry their bags. They accepted his help. He carried their bags to the apartment building where they lived on Kimgradskia Street. The 2 women lived there with their grandmothers. After that day, Kiselev continued to visit them. He spent time with Lilia and Olesya. He also became friendly with their grandmothers. The relationships were friendly but not romantic. There was no sexual relationship between Kiselev and either of the women. In late October, Kiselev told Olesya that he loved her. He asked her to have sex with him. She refused. She told him she had a fiancé back in Kogalym. On the afternoon of October 29, 2003, Kiselev met Lilia Taratina. They went for a walk together. After the walk, he invited her to his apartment. He said they could drink coffee and play cards. Lilia agreed and went with him to his apartment at 64 Penzinskaya Street. They played cards. When the game ended, Kiselev took a tie. He used it to strangle Lilia until she died. That same evening, after killing Lilia, Kiselev bought a bouquet of roses. He went to the home of Olesya Danutsa. When he arrived, Olesya was not feeling well. She needed to go to a local pharmacy to get medicine. Kiselev walked with her to the pharmacy. After she got her medicine, he walked her back home. He did not enter her apartment. He left. On the next day, October 30th, Kiselev went back to Olesya's home. He talked to her and convinced her to go for a walk with him. During the walk, he invited her to his apartment for coffee. She agreed. She went with him to his apartment. Within minutes after she entered, Kiselev took the same tie he had used on Lilia. He strangled Olesya until she died. After killing both women, Kiselev needed to hide their bodies. He dug a shallow grave near his house. He placed both bodies in the grave and covered them with dirt. He left the ties around their necks. He liked that the ties matched the color of the shoes the women were wearing. In the days that followed, the families of Lilia and Olesya reported them missing. Police began to look into their disappearances. They learned that Kiselev was one of the last people to have been seen with the two women. Officers decided they wanted to question him. When Kiselev found out that police were asking about him, he ran away. He left his apartment and went into hiding. For about 1 month, Kiselev stayed away from his home. He did not turn himself in. Then in early December, he contacted a different woman he knew. Her name was Olga. He asked to meet her for a date. Olga had been told by investigators that there was a warrant for Kiselev's arrest. When he made contact with her, she immediately called the police. More than 18 years later, Kiselev was living in a penal colony near the town of Gorno-Zavodsk. He had been serving a sentence for the 2003 murders, but in 2020 he was granted a change to his sentence. He was moved to forced labor at a woodworking enterprise in Gorno-Zavodsk. There, he worked as a foreman. Among the workers under him was a 43-year-old woman named Natalia. She lived in a nearby town called Chusovoy. She was a mother of 3 children. Kiselev and Natalia spent time together because she was his subordinate at work. He began paying special attention to her. He did not tell her the truth about his past crimes. Instead, he told her he had been convicted of hooliganism, which is a minor offense. He also told her that he had once been married and had a child, but that his wife had left him soon after the baby was born. In late August 2022, Kiselev was granted parole. He left the penal colony and rented an apartment in Chusovoy, the town where Natalia lived. Over the next few weeks, he started an intimate relationship with Natalia. At that time, Natalia was living with a man she had been with for 13 years. They had recently married. Despite this, she continued to see Kiselev. On November 13th, 2022, Natalia went to church with her children and her mother. After church, she went to meet Kiselev for a date. That evening, Kiselev killed her. He strangled her. The process took a long time. He used different objects to strangle her: his trouser belt, plastic garbage bags, a belt from his bag, and a cable antenna. He also hit her. By the end, she was dead. Her body was found the next day on the floor of an apartment on 50, Let VLKSM Street in Chusovoy. She was naked from the waist down. After the murder, Kiselev packed his things and left the apartment. He headed toward the city of Perm, where his parents lived. He did not go directly to their home. Instead, he stayed cautious. He slept in rented apartments. He changed the SIM card in his phone every day so that his movements would be harder to track. He was now a fugitive again. After Kiselev was arrested in early December 2003, police brought him in for questioning. He admitted that he had killed Lilia Taratina and Olesya Danutsa. He He also claimed that he had sex with both women before they died, and he said the sex was consensual. Investigators believed he might have raped them, but they could not prove it. When asked why he killed them, Kiselev said he did not have a reason. He said he had an uncontrollable urge to kill. On December 11, 2003, police took Kiselev to the area near his apartment. He showed them where he had buried the bodies. Investigators dug up the shallow grave. They found the bodies of both women. The ties were still around their necks. The case went to trial. On June 16, 2004, the court found Kiselev guilty of both murders. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Kiselev appealed the sentence. His appeal was accepted because the prosecutors had made procedural mistakes during the investigation. The appeals court reduced his sentence by 2 years. He now had to serve 20 years. Kiselev was sent to prison. While inside, he behaved well. Prison officials saw him as a good inmate. He received recommendations for early release. In November 2018, he asked to be let out on parole, but the request was denied. In 2020, after serving 17 years, Kiselev made another request. This time he asked to have the rest of his sentence replaced with forced labor instead of prison. The request was granted. He was transferred to a penal colony near the town of Gorno-Zavodsk. There, he worked at a woodworking enterprise. He was given the position of foreman. On November 14, 2022, one day after Natalia was killed, her body was found on the floor of an apartment in Chusovoy. Police began investigating her death. They looked into her activities on the day she died. They learned that she had gone to church with her children and her mother. At the church, she had requested a 3-month mental health detention order for a man named Alexander Kiselev. This was a document that could force someone to receive psychiatric care. Police started searching for Kiselev. They found out he lived in a rented apartment nearby. When they went to that apartment, he was not there. He had already left. For the next several days, Kiselev moved carefully. He stayed in rented apartments and changed his phone SIM card every day to avoid being tracked. He traveled toward Perm, where his parents lived. On November 20th, 2022, a woman who rented out apartments in Perm contacted police. She told them that one of her tenants was named Alexander Kiselev. That evening, she went to the apartment and demanded that Kiselev let her in. He refused. She told him she would throw him out if he did not pay his rent again. When he opened the door, police officers who were waiting outside moved in and arrested him. At the moment of arrest, Kiselev was pale and losing consciousness. He had tried to kill himself. Medics treated him, and once he was stable, investigators questioned him. He admitted to killing Natalia. He said they had argued because he wanted her to divorce her husband and marry him. When she refused, he became angry. He strangled her and hit her. He said they had sex before she died, and he claimed it was consensual. Natalia's mother said her daughter had been raped. Kiselev was charged with murder. The case went to trial. On September 29, 2023, the court found him guilty. He was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in prison. The court considered that he had cooperated and confessed, so he did not receive a life sentence. Natalia's family was angry. They thought the sentence was too short. They appealed to a higher court in the Perm region, asking for a longer sentence. On October 26, 2023, the appeal was rejected. The sentence remained 13 years and 6 months. Natalia's mother spoke to reporters after the hearing. She said she dreamed about her daughter often. She said she would try to bring the case to Central Television to gain public support. Kiselev was sent back to prison to serve his new sentence. Lilia Taratina and Olesya Danutsa had been dead for 20 years. Natalia's 3 children grew up without their mother. The case was closed. Story 4. Anatoly Yuryevich Markov was born in 1973 in the city of Stavropol in southern Russia. His family appeared normal to neighbors and relatives. Not long after his birth, the Markov family moved to the Chekhono-Ingush Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, a region in the North Caucasus. They lived there for about 20 years. During that time, Anatoly grew up, went to school, and became a young man. In the mid-1990s, the First Chechen War brought violence and instability to the area. Because of the fighting, the Markov family decided to return to Stavropol Krai, the region where Anatoly had been born. They settled in a village called Grigoropolyskia. There, Anatoly finished high school. After graduating, he had trouble finding steady work. He took low-skilled jobs, but employment was never stable. Starting in the early 2000s, Markov's life changed. He stopped living in one place and became a vagrant. He moved from town to town, often sleeping where he could. During this time, he also began drinking heavily. His alcohol addiction grew worse over time. As he drifted, he collected criminal convictions. He was found guilty of theft, fraud, and causing harm to health. These were not murder charges, but they showed that he was already breaking the law. Despite his crimes and his drinking, people who knew him in the villages often described him in a positive way. Acquaintances said he was calm and friendly. They did not see him as aggressive or dangerous. To them, he was just a local man who had fallen on hard times. In October 2001, Markov was in Novo-Alexandrovsk, a town in Stavropol Krai. He got into an argument with two men. During that argument, Markov picked up an axe and hacked both men to death. After killing them, he left Stavropol Krai and traveled to Moscow. He did not stay in one place. In Moscow, he survived by begging, stealing, and selling stolen goods. While in Moscow, Markov met a man named Alexander Lesnoy. Lesnoy was from Ukraine and was a criminal. He was hiding in Russia because he was wanted for murder charges in his home country. Markov and Lesnoy became friends. Over several days, they decided to commit crimes together. Their first joint murder happened on February 6, 2002, in Moscow's Arbat district. They went to the apartment of a man who lived there. The three of them drank alcohol together. During the drinking, a quarrel started. Markov and Lesnoy attacked the man and killed him. Afterward, they stole money and valuables from his apartment. The next day, February 7th, they left Moscow and traveled to the village of Sotino. In that village lived a 35-year-old woman named Olga Iskandarova. Markov knew her from before. Recently, she had started drinking heavily. Markov and Lesnoy went to her house. On February 9th, a drinking party began at Iskandarova's house. They were celebrating Lesnoy's birthday. Several other people came to the house. One was Yuri Kardin, a 58-year-old pensioner who had twice been convicted of murder. Another was Nina Kurikina, a woman from Moldova, and her 19-year-old son Gennady. A middle-aged man whose last name was Vasiliev also came. The group spent the day and night drinking alcohol. As the drinking continued, a conflict broke out among the guests. In their drunken state, Markov grabbed an axe and Lesnoy grabbed a knife. They attacked and killed Nina Kurikina, Gennady Kurikin, and Vasiliev. After that, they drank more alcohol. Then they went to another room in the house. In that room, Olga Iskandarova and her 8-year-old daughter Lida were sleeping. Markov and Lesnoy killed them while they slept. Then Markov remembered Yuri Kardin. Kardin had left the party earlier and gone home. Markov and Lesnoy worried that Kardin might remember what they had done or later identify them. So they went to Kardin's home. They knocked on the door. When Kardin opened it, they killed him. Then they went inside and found his 63-year-old wife Raisa. They killed her as well. After killing all 7 people in Sotino, Markov and Lesnoy took items of value from the houses. They also took the remaining alcohol. They later traded the alcohol for meat. 2 days later, a neighbor found the bodies. Markov and Lesnoy left Sotino. They bought train tickets bound for Ryazan. On February 10th, they arrived at the train station in Ryazk. There they met a 62-year-old man named Nikolai Bogachenko, who was an alcoholic. Bogachenko invited them to sleep at his home for the night. Later that day, the two men, Bogachenko and another man named Valery Tishik, who was 25 years old, began drinking together. Another quarrel started. Again, Markov took an axe and Lesnoy took a knife. They attacked and killed both Bogachenko and Tishik. After these murders, Markov and Lesnoy separated. Markov returned to his parents' house in Grigoropolyskia. Lesnoy went back to Ukraine. Markov's family did not ask many questions. They were used to him being gone for months at a time because he lived as a vagrant. In the years after, Markov continued to commit petty crimes and received more convictions. After the bodies were found in Sotino, the police began their investigation. The murders had shocked the village and the surrounding area. Investigators looked for witnesses and quickly focused on two-day laborers who had been seen at Olga Iskandarova's house on February 8th. These two men were tracked down and arrested. Under pressure, both wrote confessions. They claimed that one of them had been infected with AIDS by Iskandarova, and that was the motive. However, the case against them never went to trial. Later it became clear that they were innocent. While investigating, police also spoke with villagers and workers at the nearby Podlipki railway station. Witnesses described seeing two men who were not from the area. One of the men carried a large sports bag. The two men were seen buying train tickets to Ryazan on the day after the murders. Investigators then connected the Sotino killings to the double murder in Ryazk that happened the next day. At the Ryazk crime scene, police found a sports bag matching the witness's description. Inside the bag was a watch that belonged to one of the Sotino victims. This link showed that the same two men had committed both massacres. Despite these connections, the investigation could not identify the killers. No arrests were made for the murders. Over time, the cases grew cold and remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. In 2022, the investigative committee decided to reopen old cases that had been suspended. They used new forensic technologies that had not been available during the original investigation. Investigators went back to the crime scenes in Sotino. Among the evidence they re-examined was a vodka bottle left behind from the night of the killings. On that bottle, they found fingerprints that had not been identified before. The fingerprints were run through databases and matched to a man named Anatoly Markov, who was then 49 years old. On July 6, 2022, police went to Grigoropolyskia and arrested Markov at his parents' home. After the arrest, Markov confessed to all the murders. He gave investigators a detailed account of what had happened. He also showed them newspaper clippings about the crimes that he had kept. When asked about his accomplice, Markov named Alexander Lesnoy. About a month later, Lesnoy was arrested. During the investigation, both men admitted their responsibility. Neither showed remorse. Markov said he considered himself a cleaner who had rid society of all kinds of scum. Psychiatric evaluations were conducted. Both men were found to be sane and without mental abnormalities that would affect their criminal responsibility. Their trial began on November 9, 2023. On December 20th, the court found both Markov and Lesnoy guilty on all charges. However, because the aggravated murder charges had passed the statute of limitations, the court could not give them the maximum sentences. Markov was sentenced to 19 years in a strict regime penal colony. Lesnoy was sentenced to 17 years in a strict regime penal colony. After the trial, Markov and Lesnoy were sent to serve their sentences. The families of the 12 victims were left with the knowledge that the men who killed their loved ones had finally been identified and punished, though the sentences were shorter than what the law would have allowed if the cases had been solved sooner. Story 5. Lorenzo Montoya was born in 1966 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His parents were working-class people who moved to the city from rural parts of the state before he was born. He grew up in the South Valley, an area of Albuquerque with dirt roads, small houses, and a close community. His father worked in construction, and his mother stayed home to raise Lorenzo and his two older sisters. From an early age, Lorenzo was described by neighbors as a quiet boy who kept to himself. He did not have many friends in the neighborhood. When he went to elementary school, teachers noticed he had trouble paying attention in class. He often sat in the back and did not join group activities. When Lorenzo was 11 years old, his parents separated. His father moved out of the house, and Lorenzo stayed with his mother. The separation affected him deeply. His mother worked longer hours to support the family, so Lorenzo spent much of his time alone after school. By middle school, he started getting into small fights with other boys. He was suspended twice for pushing a classmate in the hallway and for breaking a window with a rock. School counselors spoke with his mother, but she did not know how to manage his anger. Lorenzo never received counseling or therapy. He dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. He was 16 years old. For the next few years, he worked odd jobs. He washed dishes at a diner, helped a landscaping crew, and eventually found steady work at a printing company in Albuquerque. The company printed flyers, business cards, and brochures. Lorenzo learned to operate the large printing presses. He was good with machines and worked there for many years. Coworkers later said he was a hard worker, but rarely spoke to anyone during breaks. He kept a small circle of acquaintances, but no close friends. In his 20s, Lorenzo started visiting the area of Central Avenue in Albuquerque, known for sex workers. He would drive his car up and down the street late at night. He was arrested twice for assault involving sex workers. The first arrest was in 1992. A woman reported that he picked her up, drove to a secluded area, and then choked her until she passed out. When she woke up, she ran to a nearby gas station and called the police. Lorenzo was arrested, but the case did not go to trial because the woman did not show up to court. The second arrest was in 1995. Another woman said Lorenzo hit her and tried to force her into his trunk. She escaped and flagged down a police car. That case was dismissed as well, due to lack of evidence. Despite these arrests, Lorenzo kept his job at the printing company. He lived in a small trailer park on the West Mesa of Albuquerque. The trailer park was about 3 miles from a large stretch of empty desert land. In the late 1990s, the West Mesa was still mostly undeveloped. There were dirt roads, arroyos, and open space. Lorenzo's trailer was modest. He had a girlfriend who lived with him on and off. Neighbors in the trailer park said he kept to himself. They noticed that he sometimes left late at night and came back before dawn. When asked, he said he liked to drive around to clear his mind. Lorenzo had a habit of taking photographs and recording videos. He owned a video camera and would sometimes film his girlfriend without her knowing. He also kept pictures of women he met on Central Avenue. People who knew him said he would talk about women in a degrading way. He called them names and said they were worthless. Coworkers later told police that Lorenzo would sometimes talk about killing women. They thought he was joking or trying to scare them. He would say things like, "If I ever killed someone, I would bury them in lime so they would disappear." The coworkers did not report these statements because they did not think he was serious. In the early 2000s, Lorenzo continued to live in the same trailer park and work at the printing company. He had a routine. He would go to work during the day, come home, and then go out late at night. His girlfriend moved out permanently in 2002 after an argument in which he threatened to kill her and bury her in lime. She did not report the threat to police at the time. She was afraid of him. After she left, Lorenzo lived alone in the trailer. He spent most of his free time driving around the city, especially near Central Avenue and in the areas where sex workers were known to be. After his girlfriend left in 2002, Lorenzo Montoya lived alone in his trailer on the West Mesa. He kept his job at the printing company, but his nights became more focused on a single activity. He would drive his car to Central Avenue, the main street where women sold sex to make money. Many of these women were young. Some were teenagers. Some had problems with drugs. Many had run away from home or had no stable place to live. Lorenzo learned to recognize them. He learned which corners they stood on and what times of night they were most available. He did not approach them like a regular customer. He would drive slowly, sometimes circling the same block several times. When he found a woman he wanted to approach, he would pull over and offer money for sex. The women did not know him. To them, he was just another man in a car. They would get in, and he would drive them to a place he had already chosen. That place was a stretch of empty desert on the West Mesa, not far from his trailer park. It was an arroyo, a dry creek bed, with soft dirt and no houses nearby. At night, it was completely dark. No one could see what happened there. The first woman he killed was named Monica Candelaria. She was 22 years old. On May 15, 2003, Lorenzo picked her up on Central Avenue. He drove her to the arroyo. What happened next followed a pattern he would repeat. He forced her to have sex. Then he attacked her. He used his hands to strangle her. When she stopped breathing, he used a shovel he kept in his trunk to dig a hole in the dirt. He buried her body in the shallow grave. Then he drove home. The next day, he went to work as usual. No one knew what he had done. 3 weeks later, on June 5, 2003, he killed Victoria Chavez. She was 26 years old. The same method: pick up on Central, drive to the arroyo, strangle, bury. Lorenzo was careful. He did not use a gun or a knife because those could leave evidence. His hands left no weapon behind. He wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. After each burial, he would drive back to the trailer, shower, and go to sleep. He did this again on August 17, 2003, with Selania Edwards, a 15-year-old girl who had run away from her home in Oklahoma. She was the youngest of his victims. Lorenzo began to treat the arroyo as his private place. He knew the land was undeveloped. No one came out there. Between 2003 and 2005, he continued to pick up women from Central Avenue. He learned that they often worked alone. Many had no one who would report them missing right away. Some had families who looked for them, but the police often classified them as runaways or said they would come back on their own. This made Lorenzo feel safe. On October 10, 2003, he killed Doreen Marquez, 24 years old. On February 14, 2004, he killed Veronica Romero, 28. On March 26, 2004, he killed 2 women in one night: Jamie Barella, who was 15, and her cousin Evelyn Salazar, who was 27. He had picked them up together. He drove them to the arroyo. He forced them both out of the car. Then he killed them one after the other and buried them side by side. On April 13, 2004, he killed Virginia Cloven, 24. On July 15, 2004, he killed Julie Nieto, 24. On August 20, 2004, he killed Cinnamon Elks, 32. On September 22, 2004, he killed Michelle Valdez, 22. Michelle was 4 months pregnant. Lorenzo did not know she was pregnant when he picked her up, and he did not stop when he found out. He killed her and buried her with the others. Each time, the steps were the same. He would drive to Central Avenue after dark. He would look for a woman who was alone. He would offer money. He would drive her to the arroyo. He would have sex with her, sometimes by force. Then he would strangle her. He would take her clothes and any belongings she had to remove evidence. He would bury her in the soft dirt of the arroyo. Then he would go home. Sometimes he would clean his car. Sometimes he would wash his clothes. He kept a shovel in his trunk at all times. Lorenzo also began to take photographs and videos of women. He had a camera. Some of the women he recorded were alive at the time. Some may have been dead. He kept these recordings in his trailer. He also kept items that belonged to the women, like jewelry and underwear. He did not throw these things away. He kept them as souvenirs. Between 2003 and 2005, he killed 11 women and buried them in the same area. He did not bury them all in the exact same spot. He spread them along the arroyo, covering each grave with dirt. Over time, tire tracks from his car created paths across the desert. Satellite images taken during those years later showed the tracks and patches of disturbed soil. But at the time, no one was looking at satellite images of that empty land. In 2005, he stopped. He did not kill again in that way. The reason is not known for certain, but one event changed his situation. In December 2006, he killed another woman, but this time it was different. Her name was Sharika Hill, a 19-year-old sex worker. He picked her up and took her to his trailer, not the arroyo. He strangled her in his home. This time, however, Sharika's boyfriend had followed them. The boyfriend, Frederick Williams, saw Lorenzo trying to put Sharika's body into the trunk of his car. Frederick shot Lorenzo. Lorenzo died at the scene. Sharika was found in the trailer. Her death was ruled a homicide, and Lorenzo's death was ruled justifiable. When the police searched Lorenzo's trailer after his death, they found things that connected him to the West Mesa murders. They found women's jewelry and underwear that did not belong to anyone in his life. They found a video camera with a recording that showed a woman who appeared to be unconscious or dead. In the video, sounds could be heard of duct tape being torn and a trash bag being opened. They found evidence that he had buried bodies in lime, just as he had told his coworkers years before. But at the time of his death in 2006, the bodies in the arroyo had not yet been found. No one knew the 11 women were there. Lorenzo was buried after his death. The women stayed buried in the desert for 3 more years. In early 2009, the empty land on the West Mesa where Lorenzo Montoya had buried the women was no longer empty. A developer had bought the land to build new houses. Workers had moved dirt and built a retaining wall to control flooding. In February 2009, a woman was walking her dog near the site. The dog found a bone. The woman picked it up and saw that it looked like a human bone. She called the Albuquerque Police Department. Officers came to the area. They searched the ground and found more bones. Soon, a full team of detectives and forensic experts arrived. They began a careful excavation of the arroyo. Over the next several months, they dug up the remains of 11 women and girls. Each set of remains was in a shallow grave. The medical examiner confirmed that all had been killed by strangulation. The women had been missing for years. Some families had reported them missing. Some had not. Detectives used DNA and dental records to identify each victim. As the remains were identified, police began looking for a connection among the victims. All 11 were women who had been involved in sex work on Central Avenue. All had disappeared between 2003 and 2004. Detectives realized they were looking for a single killer who had used the same burial site over a period of time. The police had a suspect in mind before the excavation was complete. Lorenzo Montoya had died in 2006 while killing another woman. His trailer was less than 3 miles from the burial site. When detectives reviewed the files from his death, they found the evidence collected from his home. The jewelry and underwear that belonged to unknown women. The video recordings. The statements from coworkers that he had talked about killing women and burying them in lime. The threat he had made to his former girlfriend about burying her in lime. Detectives also looked at satellite images of the West Mesa from the years 2003 to 2005. The images showed tire tracks leading to the exact area where the bodies were found. They showed patches of disturbed earth that matched the locations of the graves. The tire tracks led toward the trailer park where Lorenzo had lived. The police questioned people who knew Lorenzo. His coworkers told them about his comments. His former girlfriend told them about his threats. Neighbors in the trailer park said they sometimes saw him leave late at night and come back early in the morning. One neighbor remembered seeing a shovel in his car. Detectives also looked at the 2 previous assault cases involving Lorenzo from the 1990s. The women he had assaulted were sex workers. He had choked them. He had tried to put one woman in his trunk. The pattern was clear. He had been practicing violence against sex workers for years before the first West Mesa murder. By 2010, the police had gathered enough evidence to be confident that Lorenzo Montoya was the person who killed the 11 women. They announced that the case was essentially solved. However, because Lorenzo had been killed in 2006, he could not be arrested or put on trial. The district attorney's office stated that no charges would be filed against a dead person. The case was officially closed in terms of the primary suspect. For the families of the victims, the news was both a relief and a frustration. They finally knew what had happened to their daughters, sisters, and cousins. But they would never see a trial or a conviction. Some families held memorial services. The city of Albuquerque and community groups later created a memorial park at the site where the bodies were found. A 1-acre park named Women's Memorial Park was opened in June 2020 to honor the women and give their families a place to remember them. In the years after the discovery, police continued to investigate whether Lorenzo had killed other women. They reviewed missing persons cases from the same time period and found 9 other women with similar backgrounds who had disappeared but were never found. Those cases remain open. No other suspect has been named. The evidence pointed only to Lorenzo Montoya. Lorenzo Montoya died in 2006 at the age of 40. He was buried in a cemetery in Albuquerque. The 11 women he killed were eventually given proper burials by their families. No trial was held. No sentence was given. But the investigation proved that the man who had lived quietly in the trailer park, who had worked at the printing company for years, was the one who had driven the streets of Central Avenue night after night, picking up women and taking them to the desert to die. Story 6. Juan Vallejo Corona was born on February 7, 1934, in Ayutla, a small town in the state of Jalisco, Mexico. He was one of several children in his family. He had 4 brothers and 1 sister who had already left Mexico to live in the United States before him. When Juan was 16 years old, in 1950, he crossed the border into California without legal permission. He went to the Imperial Valley, where he found work picking carrots and melons. He did this work for about 3 months. After that, he moved north to the Sacramento Valley. Juan had a half-brother named Jose Natividad Corona Sanchez. Natividad had moved to Marysville, California. At some point, Natividad attacked a man with a weapon that was like a machete. A lawsuit was filed against Natividad because of that attack. When Natividad lost the lawsuit, he fled back to Mexico. In May 1953, Juan moved to the Marysville, Yuba City area. His half-brother Natividad had suggested that he go there. Juan found work on a local ranch. Later that year, on October 24, 1953, he married a woman named Gabriela E. Hermosillo. They were married in Reno, Nevada. In 1956, Juan had what doctors thought was a schizophrenic episode. His half-brother Natividad arranged for him to be admitted to DeWitt State Hospital in Auburn, California. At the hospital, doctors said Juan had schizophrenic reaction, paranoid type. He received 23 electroconvulsive therapy sessions. After 3 months, the doctors said he had recovered, and he was released. When he left the hospital, he was deported back to Mexico. By 1958, Juan had returned to the United States. In that year, he married a woman named Gloria I. Moreno. Together they had 4 daughters. Their names were Martha, Victoria, Yolanda, and Guadalupe. In 1962, Juan received a green card. This allowed him to live and work in the United States legally. People who knew him saw him as a hard worker. But he also had times when he showed a violent temper and had more episodes that were like his earlier mental illness. In March 1970, he was admitted to DeWitt State Hospital again for treatment. After that, Juan became a licensed labor contractor. In this job, he was in charge of hiring workers for fruit ranches. In March 1971, he applied for welfare, but his application was denied. After his welfare application was denied in March 1971, Juan Corona continued working as a licensed labor contractor in the Marysville, Yuba City area. His job was to hire men to work on fruit ranches. He supplied workers to several ranches, including the Sullivan Ranch, which had a bunkhouse where Corona sometimes housed the men who worked for him. Starting in late February 1971, and continuing through May of that year, Corona began killing men. The men he killed were all middle-aged. They were between 40 and 64 years old. They were all Caucasian. Many of them were drifters, meaning they moved from place to place and did not have permanent homes. Most of them had criminal records. Corona chose these men because they were often alone and not likely to be missed right away. Corona would pick up men from the area, sometimes from bars or from the streets. Witnesses later told police that some of the victims had been seen riding in Corona's pickup truck shortly before they disappeared. He brought them to the ranches where he worked, and there he killed them. Corona used different weapons. For most of the killings, he used a knife or a machete. He stabbed or slashed the men with these blades. For one victim, a man named William Emery Camp, Corona used a 9mm gun and shot him in the head. After killing each man, Corona buried the body in a peach orchard. Many of the bodies were buried on the Sullivan Ranch. Others were buried on nearby ranches along the Feather River. He dug holes in the ground, placed the bodies inside, and covered them with dirt. In some cases, he returned to the graves later to add more dirt or to level the ground so the graves would not be easily noticed. Corona kept a work ledger. This was a notebook where he wrote down names and dates of men he hired. In this ledger, he wrote 34 names with dates next to them. 7 of those names matched men who would later be found dead. The dates in the ledger were close to the times when those men were last seen alive. On May 19, 1971, a farm owner was walking through his peach orchard. He saw a spot where the ground looked like it had been freshly dug. The hole had been filled in, but the dirt was still loose. The next day, he looked again and decided to dig. Under the dirt, he found the body of a man. The man had been stabbed and cut with a blade. When deputies came to investigate that first grave, they found 2 meat receipts near the body. The receipts had Corona's signature on them. As they searched more of the orchard and nearby ranches, they found more graves. In 2 of those graves, deputies found crumpled Bank of America deposit slips. Those slips had Corona's name and address printed on them. The discovery of the first body on May 19th led to more bodies being found. Over the next days, authorities kept digging. They found grave after grave. By the time they stopped searching, they had uncovered 25 bodies. 4 of those men were never identified. The victims had all been killed in similar ways, mostly with knives or a machete, and buried in shallow graves in the orchards. During this time, while the bodies were being found, some people in the area told deputies that they had seen certain victims with Juan Corona shortly before they disappeared. They remembered seeing the men getting into Corona's pickup truck. At that point, deputies began to focus on Corona as the person who might have committed the killings. On May 26, 1971, deputies went to Juan Corona's home in Yuba City with a search warrant. They entered in the early morning hours and arrested him. Inside the house, they found knives with blood on them, a machete, a pistol, clothing that had bloodstains, and the work ledger that contained names and dates. Deputies took these items as evidence. Corona was taken into custody. After the arrest, the search for more bodies continued. By June 4, 1971, a total of 25 male victims had been found buried in the orchards. 4 of them could not be identified. On July 12th, a grand jury returned an indictment charging Corona with 25 counts of murder. Corona was first assigned a public defender, but later a private attorney named Richard Hawk took over the case. Hawk made an agreement with Corona to receive the rights to Corona's life story in exchange for his legal work. The case was moved to Solano County because the courts wanted a location where the publicity would not affect the jury. The trial began on September 11, 1972, in Fairfield, California. During the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence that had been found: the receipts with Corona's name, the deposit slips, the work ledger, and the witnesses who had seen victims with Corona before they disappeared. The defense did not call Corona to testify. No witnesses were called by the defense. The jury spent 45 hours deciding the case. On January 18, 1973, they found Corona guilty of first-degree murder on all 25 counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 life terms. The sentences were set to run one after another. Corona appealed the conviction. On May 18, 1978, the California Court of Appeal granted him a new trial. The court decided that his original lawyer, Richard Hawk, had not done a proper investigation and had a conflict of interest because he had taken the rights to Corona's story. That meant the lawyer's interests were not fully aligned with Corona's defense. A second trial began on February 22, 1982, in Hayward, California. This time, the defense argued that the real killer was Corona's half-brother, Natividad. The defense said Natividad had a history of violence and had fled to Mexico after attacking a man with a machete. The defense called more than 50 witnesses. Corona himself took the stand. Through an interpreter, he answered 2 questions. He said he understood the charges and said he had nothing to do with killing the men. The prosecution again showed the work ledger, the receipts, and the witnesses who had seen victims with Corona. The jury took 54 hours over 2 weeks to reach a verdict. On September 23, 1982, they again found Corona guilty on all 25 counts. He was sent back to prison. While in prison, Corona was moved to different facilities. In December 1973, he was stabbed by other inmates. He lost his left eye and had a blade fragment lodged behind his right eye. His wife filed for divorce in 1974, and it was granted that same year. Over the years, Corona was denied parole 8 times. At a parole hearing in 2011, he admitted to the killings, saying the victims were trespassers on his property. At a later hearing in 2016, he said he could not remember the crimes. On March 4, 2019, Juan Corona died of natural causes at a hospital near Corcoran State Prison. He was 85 years old. The 25 men he killed never left the orchards, but the case against him remained closed with his death. Story 7. Cody Allen Leijbokoff was born on November 27, 1990, in Prince George, British Columbia. He grew up in a small town called Fort St. James, which is about 150 kilometers northwest of Prince George. This area is in northern British Columbia, near forests and lakes. Cody's parents were both working people. His mother worked for the local government, and his father worked in the forestry industry. The family was considered normal by people who knew them. Cody was the only child. His parents gave him a lot of attention and support. When he was young, they signed him up for sports. Cody became very good at skiing. He started racing when he was a child and continued into his teenage years. He practiced often and traveled to different towns for competitions. People who knew him then described him as a quiet boy but friendly. He did not get into trouble. His teachers saw him as an average student. He was not the loudest in class, but he passed his courses. When Cody was around 13 years old, his family moved from Fort St. James to Prince George. Prince George was a bigger city, but still had a small city feel. Cody attended a public high school there. He continued skiing and also began spending time on the internet. He played online video games and used social media. At home, his parents gave him his own computer in his room. He spent hours there after school. In high school, Cody looked like a normal teenager. He was tall, had short brown hair, and dressed casually. He did not have many close friends. Some classmates thought he was quiet and kept to himself. He did not join school clubs or teams outside of skiing. Around age 15, he started dating a girl. The relationship lasted for a while, and they seemed like a normal young couple. His girlfriend later said that Cody could be very nice, but also had a temper. She said he once grabbed her arm hard during an argument. She did not report it to anyone at the time. Cody graduated from high school in 2009. After graduation, he did not go to university or college right away. He stayed in Prince George and moved into an apartment with his girlfriend. He got a job at a local grocery store, working as a clerk. He worked part-time hours. His co-workers remembered him as a quiet young man who did his job, but did not talk much. He often worked evening shifts. By this time, Cody had stopped skiing competitively. He spent more time alone. He still used his computer a lot. His girlfriend later said that he began to change. He seemed more distant and sometimes angry over small things. He also started driving a vehicle he had bought with money saved from work. It was a silver four-door sedan. He kept it clean and would often go for drives alone, sometimes late at night. He told people he liked driving to clear his head. In early 2010, his girlfriend moved out of the apartment. The relationship ended. Cody stayed in the apartment by himself. He kept working at the grocery store, but his hours were reduced. He had more free time than before. Neighbors in his apartment building said he was quiet. They rarely saw him with visitors. During that spring and summer, Cody began using the internet to meet people. He was active on a social networking site called Nexopia, which was popular in Canada at the time. On his profile, he presented himself as a normal young man. He posted pictures of himself, some with his vehicle. He wrote about enjoying sports and hanging out with friends. In reality, he was spending more time alone, driving the highways around Prince George. People who interacted with him online later said he seemed ordinary. There were no obvious signs of violence or anger in his online posts. He did not talk about crime or hurting anyone. His internet activity did not raise any red flags to the people who knew him. Cody's parents remained in contact with him. They would call or visit from time to time. They did not notice anything deeply wrong. He told them he was working and doing fine. His father later said Cody seemed like a normal young man who was trying to figure out what to do with his life. During the late summer of 2010, Cody turned 20 years old. He was still working at the grocery store. He still lived alone in his apartment. He still drove his silver car. He continued to spend his evenings on the computer and his late nights driving. To the outside world, he appeared to be an unremarkable young man living a quiet life in Prince George. By the fall of 2009, Cody Lejbokoff was still living alone in his apartment in Prince George. He worked part-time at a grocery store, but he spent many of his evenings and late nights driving his silver sedan along the highways that stretched out from the city. He drove Highway 16, known locally as the Highway of Tears, and he drove the smaller roads that branched off into the forest. He did not tell anyone what he was doing on those drives. On October 9, 2009, a gravel pit on the outskirts of Prince George became the place where Cody committed his first known murder. That day he encountered a woman named Jill Stacy Stachenko. Jill was 35 years old. She was a mother of 5 children. She lived in Prince George and was known to engage in sex work to support herself. Cody picked her up in his car. He drove her to a remote gravel pit. Once there, he struck her in the head multiple times with a blunt object. The blows were delivered with enough force to kill her. After she was dead, he left her body in the gravel pit. He then drove away and returned to his apartment. Jill's body was discovered later that same month, but at the time, no one connected her death to Cody Lejbokoff. For the next several months, Cody continued his normal routine. He worked, he stayed in his apartment, and he drove. In the summer of 2010, he began using the internet more actively to meet people. He was active on a social media site called Nexopia. Through that site, he began communicating with a 15-year-old girl named Loren Don Leslie. Loren lived in the small community of Vanderhoof, about 100 kilometers west of Prince George. She was a high school student. She enjoyed being online and talking to new people. She and Cody started messaging each other regularly. He presented himself as a normal young man. He did not tell her his real age. Over time, their conversations became friendly, and she began to trust him. In August 2010, Cody committed his second murder. The victim was Natasha Lynn Montgomery. Natasha was 23 years old. She was a mother. She lived in Prince George and also engaged in sex work. Cody picked her up in his car at some point in late August. He took her to his apartment. Inside the apartment, he attacked her. He beat her and killed her. After she was dead, he removed her body from the apartment. Her body was never found. However, during the attack, her blood and other biological material transferred onto Cody's clothing, his hoodie, and his belongings. He did not clean these items thoroughly. He continued to wear the same hoodie and kept the items in his apartment. Natasha's parents last heard from her on August 26, 2010, when she called them to say hello. When she did not call again, they reported her missing. Police began looking for her, but they had no leads at that time. In early September 2010, Cody met another woman in Prince George. Her name was Cynthia Frances Moss. Cynthia was 35 years old. She lived in the city and was also known to engage in sex work. On September 10th, she was last seen in the area of Juniper Street and 19th Avenue. Cody picked her up in his car. He drove her to a park in Prince George called Elsie Gunn Park. The park was a forested area on the edge of the city. Once there, he attacked Cynthia. He struck her with a blunt object and stabbed her in the chest. The wounds were deep. Cynthia tried to defend herself. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. During the attack, Cody removed her pants. He left her body in the park. Her head was partially separated from her body and was nearly skeletonized by the time she was found. He then left the park and returned home. Cynthia's family and friends reported her missing on September 23rd, after she failed to check in with them. Police began searching for her. On October 9th, 2010, a police officer named Corporal Kent McNeil was on patrol near Elsie Gunn Park. Around 2 a.m., he discovered Cynthia's remains. The condition of the body made it clear that she had been murdered. Police began investigating, but they did not yet know who was responsible. Throughout September and October 2010, Cody continued to message Loren Leslie online. He told her he wanted to meet her in person. Loren was 15 years old. She told her friends about the older man she had been talking to. Some of her friends thought it was risky, but Loren was excited to meet him. Cody arranged to pick her up on November 27, 2010. He told her he would drive to Vanderhoof and take her for a drive. On November 27th, Cody drove his silver sedan from Prince George to Vanderhoof. He picked up Loren. She got into his car willingly. He told her they would go for a drive to a quiet area. He drove north from Vanderhoof onto a remote logging road off Highway 27 near Fort St. James. The road led deep into the forest. There were no houses nearby. Once they were far from any witnesses, Cody stopped the car. He then attacked Loren. He beat her with his hands. He used a weapon to strike her. She died from the injuries he inflicted. After she was dead, he took items from her: her cell phone, some of her clothing, and other personal belongings. He placed these items in his car. He left her body on the logging road and drove away. That same evening, around 8:30 p.m., Cody was driving back toward Prince George on Highway 27. A police officer named Aaron Keller was on patrol. The officer noticed Cody's silver sedan and pulled him over for a routine traffic check. The officer approached the car and immediately saw blood on the outside of the vehicle. When the officer looked inside, he saw more blood. Cody was sitting in the driver's seat. His hands and clothing were covered in fresh blood. The officer also saw personal items that did not belong to Cody. The officer asked Cody about the blood. Cody gave an explanation, but the officer did not believe him. The officer arrested him at the scene. After Cody was taken into custody, police officers searched his car. They found Loren Leslie's belongings. They also found evidence linking Cody to the deaths of Natasha Montgomery and Cynthia Moss. In his apartment, they found more evidence, including the hoodie and shorts that contained Natasha Montgomery's DNA. The evidence showed that Cody had killed multiple women over a period of more than a year. Before his arrest, no one had publicly named Cody Lejbokoff as a suspect in any of the murders. The disappearances of Jill Stachenko, Natasha Montgomery, and Cynthia Moss had been investigated separately. Loren Leslie's family had reported her missing that same day, before they even knew she was dead. Police had noticed the pattern of missing women along Highway 16, but they had not yet connected those cases to a single young man working at a grocery store. That connection was made only after the traffic stop on November 27, 2010. The arrest of Cody Lejbokoff on November 27, 2010, took place on a remote highway near Fort St. James. The officer who pulled him over, Constable Aaron Keller, saw blood on the car and on Cody's hands and clothes. Keller did not let Cody drive away. He radioed for backup. Other officers arrived, and they took Cody to the local RCMP detachment. Inside the car, officers found a cell phone, clothing, and other items that did not belong to Cody. They also saw a large amount of blood. They seized the car and held it for forensic examination. At the detachment, officers questioned Cody. He gave them a story about being in a fight. He did not explain where the blood came from. The officers did not believe his account. They kept him in custody while they began investigating what had happened that night. Meanwhile, the family of Loren Leslie had reported her missing earlier that day. Police quickly connected the missing person report to the items found in Cody's car. Within hours, they began searching the area where Cody had been driving. On the morning of November 28th, officers located Loren's body on a logging road off Highway 27 near Fort St. James. She had been killed by blunt force trauma. With Loren's body found, police formally charged Cody Lejbokoff with first-degree murder in her death. He was held without bail. As the investigation continued, forensic teams examined his car and his apartment. In his apartment, they found a pair of shorts and a hoodie. These items had blood on them. DNA testing showed that the blood belonged to Natasha Montgomery, who had disappeared in August 2010. They also found an axe and other items with her DNA. Natasha's body was never located, but the DNA evidence proved she had been killed in Cody's apartment. Investigators also connected Cody to the murder of Cynthia Moss, whose body had been found in Elsie Gun Park in October 2010. DNA and other forensic evidence from Cody's car and apartment linked him to the scene where Cynthia was killed. Finally, they linked him to the murder of Jill Stachenko, whose body had been discovered in a gravel pit in October 2009. Evidence from Cody's vehicle and from his personal belongings placed him at that location as well. Over the next several months, the police gathered a large amount of forensic evidence. They also collected digital evidence from Cody's computer and from his online accounts. They found records of his communications with Loren Leslie and with other individuals. They established a timeline showing that Cody had been in the areas where each victim was last seen. They also interviewed people who knew him, including his former girlfriend, co-workers, and neighbors. None of them had witnessed the crimes, but they provided background that helped police understand his movements. By 2012, the Crown prosecutor had enough evidence to charge Cody with 4 counts of first-degree murder. For Jill Stachenko, Natasha Montgomery, Cynthia Moss, and Loren Leslie. The case went to trial in Prince George, beginning in the spring of 2014. The trial was held in front of a jury. The prosecution presented DNA evidence, forensic testimony, and digital records. They showed that Cody's DNA was found on the victims, and the victim's DNA was found on his belongings. They demonstrated that the murders were planned and carried out with intent. The defense argued that some of the murders were not premeditated, particularly the killing of Loren Leslie. They tried to reduce the charges to second-degree murder or manslaughter. The jury heard testimony for several weeks. On September 11, 2014, after deliberating, the jury returned its verdict. Cody Lichbokov was found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of all 4 women: Jill Stachenko, Natasha Montgomery, Cynthia Moss, and Loren Leslie. First-degree murder in Canada carries an automatic sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The judge imposed that sentence for each count to be served concurrently. After the verdict, Cody appealed his conviction. His lawyers argued that there had been errors in the trial process. In September 2016, the British Columbia Court of Appeal reviewed the case. The court confirmed the original convictions and found no reason to overturn the verdict. The sentence remained in place. Cody Lichbokov was 25 years old at the time of the appeal decision. He became known as one of Canada's youngest serial killers. The families of the victims attended the trial and the sentencing. Loren Leslie's family spoke in court about the loss of their daughter. They described her as a bright teenager who had been excited about meeting someone she trusted. Natasha Montgomery's family never recovered her body, but the conviction gave them some closure. Cynthia Moss's family also attended, remembering her as a woman who had struggled but was loved. Jill Stachenko's children grew up without their mother. The families of all 4 women have continued to honor their memory through private remembrances and, in some cases, public advocacy for safety along Highway 16. After the appeals were exhausted, Cody was transferred to a federal correctional facility. He will remain in prison for at least 25 years from the date of his arrest, meaning he will not be eligible for parole until 2035. He will be 45 years old at that time. If he is not granted parole, he will stay in prison for life. The case of Cody Lichbokov became part of the broader investigation known as Project EPANA, which the RCMP had launched to examine unsolved murders and disappearances along Highway 16. Although Lichbokov's crimes were solved through his arrest, many other cases along the Highway of Tears remain unsolved. His conviction did not end the larger pattern of missing and murdered women in northern British Columbia, but it did remove one killer from the community. The story of Cody Lichbokov's crimes, his arrest, his trial, and his imprisonment stands as a completed chapter in the long history of the Highway of Tears. For the families of the 4 young women he killed, the legal process brought a measure of justice, but it could not bring back the lives that were lost. Story 8. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939, in Belen, New Mexico. His father was Cecil Leland Ray, a mechanic who came from Oregon. His mother was Nettie Opal Parker, who was born in Texas. The family did not have much money, so when David was young, he and his younger sister Peggy went to live with their mother's parents, Russell and Dolly Parker. The grandparents owned a small ranch, and that was where David spent most of his childhood. David's father was not a steady presence in his life. Cecil would visit only now and then. When he did come, he was often violent and had been drinking. During those visits, he gave David magazines that showed sadomasochistic pornography. David was young when he first saw those pictures, and they stayed in his mind. In school, David was shy. He went to Mountain Air High School in Mountain Air, New Mexico. The other students made fun of him because he was nervous around girls. He did not know how to talk to them, and the teasing made him feel separate from the other kids. To deal with his feelings, he began drinking alcohol and using drugs while he was still a teenager. By the time he was 14, his sexual thoughts had taken a dark shape. He started to have fantasies about raping women, torturing them, and even killing them. At that age, his sister Peggy found drawings he had made. The drawings showed sadomasochistic scenes and bondage practices. After she saw those pictures, the two siblings grew apart and were never close again. David later told people that he had begun assaulting women when he was still young. In a recording he made years later, he said he had been raping women since he was old enough to masturbate and to tie up little girls. He also told his first wife that he had committed his first murder in 1957 when he was around 18. According to his story, he kidnapped a woman, tied her to a tree, and tortured her until she died. Investigators later tried to confirm that account, but could not find any proof. After high school, David joined the United States Army. He received an honorable discharge when his service ended. During his time in the military, he worked as a general mechanic, and that skill stayed with him for the rest of his life. When he left the Army, he found a job as a maintenance man for the New Mexico Parks Department. He worked in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, a small resort town about 5 miles from Elephant Butte. He held that job for his entire adult life, all the way until he was arrested. The town had several bars, and David began going to them often. Over the years, David married 4 times. Each marriage ended in divorce. He had 2 children, one of whom was a daughter named Glenda Jean Ray, who went by the nickname Jessie. As a father, he was present in her life, but his private fantasies and his behavior toward women never went away. During his time working for the Parks Department, he met a woman named Cindy Hendy. She was 37 years old and had come from Washington State, where she had been in trouble for grand theft and drug charges. She got a job at a state park in Truth or Consequences, and she and David became a couple. They discovered that they both had violent sexual fantasies, and that shared interest pulled them closer together. David Parker Ray and Cindy Hendy began living together. They shared the same dark desires, and David had been planning for years. He wanted a place where he could act out his fantasies without being heard or discovered. So he took a cargo trailer and turned it into what he called his toy box. He spent about $100,000 on this project over time. He soundproofed the walls so that screams would not escape. Inside, he installed an obstetric table with straps to hold a person down. He mounted a mirror on the ceiling above the table so that whoever was strapped to it could see everything that was done to them. He added pulleys, chains, whips, clamps, leg spreader bars, surgical blades, electric shock machines, and a homemade generator that delivered shocks. He built wooden contraptions that bent a person over and held them still. He also made a fur-lined coffin and a pillory, which locked a person's head and hands in place. The trailer was parked right outside his house in Elephant Butte, New Mexico. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary storage trailer. No one who passed by would know what was inside. David did not act alone. He sometimes brought other people to participate. Some were friends he invited. He also used his male dog to rape victims. Cindy Hendy helped him find women, bring them to the trailer, and take part in the assaults. His daughter, Glenda Jean Jessie Ray, also helped at times. In 1986, Jessie went to the FBI and tried to warn them. She told an agent that her father was abducting and torturing women and selling them to buyers in Mexico. The agent later said the allegations were too vague for the FBI to start an investigation. So no action was taken at that time, and David continued. David's pattern was the same for many years. He would kidnap about 4 or 5 women each year. He kept each victim for around 2 to 3 months. He chose his victims carefully. He looked for women in bars or on the streets. Sometimes Cindy or Jesse would help lure a woman by pretending to be a friend. Other times David would use force. Once a woman was in his control, he took her to the trailer and strapped her to the table. Before the victim woke up, David played a recorded tape. He had made the tape to explain the rules. In the recording, he told the woman that she was now his property. He said she would be raped and tortured. He explained that she would be forced to sexually service Cindy as well. Then he told her what would happen at the end. He said she would be drugged with sodium pentothal and phenobarbital, which were hypnotic drugs. He would keep her drugged for days while playing with her mind. He claimed she would not remember anything afterward. Then he would leave her by the side of a road. While a woman was held captive, David used the tools in the trailer to inflict pain. He used electric shocks, surgical blades, whips, and the various restraints. He documented what he did in a diary. The diary described sexual tortures and sometimes burials. He also took videos of some of the assaults. One woman who survived was Angelica Montano. Cindy Hendy invited her to the house, saying she could pick up a cake mix. When Angelica arrived, she was taken into the trailer instead. David raped and tortured her. After some time, Angelica convinced the pair to let her go. They drugged her and left her by the highway. An off-duty law enforcement officer picked her up. She told him what had happened, but he did not believe her. He dropped her off at a bus stop. Later she called the police to report the incident, but no one followed up on her report. Another victim was Kelly Garrett. This happened in 1996. Kelly had argued with her husband and went out to play pool with friends. Jesse Ray knew Kelly and offered to give her a ride home. Instead, Jesse took her to her father's house. Kelly was held in the trailer for 2 days. David tortured her during that time. Then he drove her back to her home. He told her husband he had found her wandering on a beach, incoherent. Kelly could not remember clearly what had happened, and she did not know what to tell the police, so she said nothing. Her husband did not believe her story about losing her memory. He later filed for divorce, and Kelly moved to Colorado. In 1997, a woman named Marie Parker disappeared. She was 22 years old and was living homeless on the shores of Elephant Butte Lake. She had 2 children. Jesse Ray supplied her with drugs, and Marie knew David through that connection. Marie had borrowed a tent from David to live in with her children. On July 5, 1997, Marie was taken into the trailer. She was tortured for several days. David ordered a man named Dennis Yancey, who sometimes joined David in the trailer, to strangle Marie to death. Yancey later helped David and Jesse dispose of the body. But David later moved the body to a different location, worried that Yancey might confess someday. In 1995, a young woman named Jill Troya was last seen in Albuquerque. She had gone to a bar with friends, then went with Jesse Ray to a restaurant. Witnesses said Jesse and Jill argued. Jesse later told police that she left Jill at the restaurant and left with her father to go to Elephant Butte. Jill was never seen again. David wrote in his diary about an Asian woman who fit Jill's description, including details about sexual torture and burial. Over the years, investigators later estimated that David may have taken as many as 4 or 5 women per year, holding each for months. Some victims he released after drugging them. Others, according to Cindy Hendy, were dismembered and buried in ravines or dumped in Elephant Butte Lake. David kept a diary that detailed what he did to each victim, but he did not write where the bodies were buried. He also told Cindy that he had killed a man named Billy Bowers, a co-owner of a car business where David had worked as a mechanic. David said he had shot Bowers in the back of the head and dumped his body in the river. For decades, no one stopped him. Women who escaped either could not remember what happened because of the drugs, or they were not believed when they told their stories. The police had received no solid evidence to open a full investigation. David kept working his maintenance job during the day and using his toy box at night. He continued his pattern year after year, with Cindy Hendy by his side and his daughter Jessie helping when needed. On March 22, 1999, a woman named Cynthia Vigil was taken from a parking lot in Albuquerque. She was brought to the trailer in Elephant Butte and held captive for 3 days. During that time, David Parker Ray and Cindy Hendy tortured her. On the 3rd day, David left for work. Cindy Hendy stayed in the trailer with Cynthia. Cindy left a set of keys on a nearby table. Cynthia saw the keys and waited until Cindy was not watching. She unlocked the chains that held her. Cindy noticed and tried to stop her. The two women fought. Cindy broke a lamp over Cynthia's head, but Cynthia kept fighting. She found an ice pick and stabbed Cindy in the neck. Then she ran out of the trailer. Cynthia was wearing only an iron slave collar and padlock chains. She ran down the road until she found a nearby house. The homeowner let her in, comforted her, and called the police. When officers arrived, Cynthia told them what had happened to her. The police went to David Parker Ray's property. They found the trailer and its contents. They also found Cindy Hendy, who was still there. David was arrested shortly after. With the trailer now open to police, investigators began searching. They found the soundproofed walls, the table, the whips, the electric shock machines, the surgical tools, the restraints, and the recorded tape that David played for his victims. They found the diary, where he had written about what he did to women. They also found videos, photographs, and items of clothing and jewelry that belonged to women who had disappeared. The FBI sent 100 agents to search the property and the surrounding land near Elephant Butte Lake. They looked for human remains, but did not find any bodies that could be identified. After the arrest, more victims came forward. Angelica Montano, who had been dismissed years earlier, told her story again. Kelly Garrett was identified from a tattoo visible in one of the videos found in the trailer. She was located in Colorado and agreed to testify. Cynthia Vigil's escape had opened the case, and now there were 3 women who could describe what David had done to them. Dennis Yancey, the man who had strangled Marie Parker on David's orders, also came forward. He confessed to his role in the murder. He led police to where he and David had left Marie's body, but the body had been moved. Yancey told police he believed David had returned later to hide the remains elsewhere. Yancey was charged with murder and other crimes. Cindy Hendy agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. She testified about what she had witnessed, including David's descriptions of killing victims and disposing of bodies in the lake and in ravines. She also confirmed that David had shown her the diary and that he had kept detailed records of his crimes. The legal process moved forward. David Parker Ray was first tried for the crimes against Kelly Garrett. The first trial ended in a mistrial because 2 jurors said they did not believe her story. David's defense argued that the trailer was part of a fantasy life and that any sex that occurred was consensual. Prosecutors pushed for a second trial. In the second trial, David was convicted on all 12 counts related to Kelly Garrett. Before he could be tried for the crimes against Cynthia Vigil, David agreed to a plea bargain. In exchange for a guilty plea, prosecutors agreed to seek a lighter sentence for his daughter, Jessie Ray, who was also facing charges. The surviving victims approved of the deal. In 2001, David Parker Ray was sentenced to 224 years in prison. His daughter, Glenda Jean Jessie Ray, pleaded no contest to charges of kidnapping and criminal sexual penetration. She received a sentence of 30 months in prison, plus 5 years of probation. Cindy Hendy received a sentence of 36 years for her role in the crimes. She was scheduled to be eligible for parole in 2017. Dennis Yancey pleaded guilty to the murder of Marie Parker and received a sentence of 30 years. He was paroled after 11 years, but later violated his parole and was sent back to custody. On May 28, 2002, David Parker Ray was taken from his prison to the Lea County Correctional Facility in Hobbs, New Mexico. State police planned to question him further about unsolved cases. Before the interrogation could take place, David died of a heart attack. He was 62 years old. After David's death, the FBI continued to investigate the possibility of additional victims. In 2011, they released hundreds of photographs of jewelry, clothing, and other items found in the trailer. They asked families of missing women to look at the pictures and contact them if they recognized anything. Investigators believed that David had killed many more women, but without remains or a confession, those cases could not be resolved. Cynthia Vigil survived her ordeal and later co-founded Street Safe New Mexico, a nonprofit that helps sex workers and vulnerable people living on the street. She dedicated herself to protecting others from the kind of harm she had suffered. The trailer known as the Toy Box was destroyed after the investigation concluded. The story of David Parker Ray ended with his death in prison, but the women who escaped carried the weight of what they had survived, and the families of the women who never returned were left without answers.